Rain fell on Woolwich Arsenal like it had fallen on the Somme 20 years before. Cold, steady, indifferent to the men below. Arthur Haskell stood at his office window and watched the water streak down glass that hadn't been cleaned since the last war ended. He was 52 years old, and he had spent half his life trying to build a gun that nobody wanted. The rejection letter lay open on his desk. Third one this year. The War Office had written the same words they always wrote. The Royal Air Force would win the next war with bombers. Field artillery was a relic. Britain didn't need new guns. Arthur turned from the window and looked at the blueprints spread across his drafting table. They showed a weapon that existed nowhere else in the world. A hybrid that combined the flat trajectory fire of the 18-pounder field gun with the high-angle capability of a howitzer. One gun that could do the work of two. One gun that could save lives as generation's weapons never could. He thought of his brother William, who had died at the Somme in 1916. The artillery barrage that was supposed to protect William's advance had failed. The shells fell short, or fell long, or didn't fall at all. The 18-pounders couldn't elevate high enough to clear the ridge. The 4.5-inch howitzers couldn't fire fast enough to suppress the German machine guns. William went over the top into a storm of lead, and Arthur, serving as a forward observer 300 yards away, watched him fall. 20 years. 20 years of designing, testing, failing, redesigning. The current model on his table was called the Ordnance QF 25-pounder, named for the weight of its shell. It could traverse 360 degrees on a special firing platform. It could engage targets at any angle. It could fire 5 rounds per minute in trained hands. And the War Office said Britain didn't need it. A knock at the door. Arthur didn't answer. The door opened anyway. Colonel Frederick Sharp stepped inside, water dripping from his greatcoat. He was 68 years old, retired from active service, but he still carried himself like a man who expected to be obeyed. He had commanded the battery next to Arthur's at the Somme. He had written the letters home to William's widow. They rejected it again, Arthur said without turning around. I know. Sharp crossed to the drafting table and studied the blueprints. I also know you've been modifying one of the old 18-pounders in the test shed, reboring the barrel, fitting a new breech. Arthur finally looked at him. That's not authorized. No, it isn't. Sharp reached into his coat and produced a folded document. Neither is this. Ive Arenod a demonstration. Private firing range in Kent. 3 observers from the War Office. They don't know what they're coming to see. Frederick, if this fails, then we both disappear. I am aware. The old colonel's eyes were hard. But I stood in the mud at the Somme and watched good men die because our guns couldn't save them. I will not stand by and watch it happen again. Arthur took the document. It bore Sharp's signature and a date 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to finish a prototype that wasn't ready. 3 weeks to prove that 20 years of work meant something. The barrel might not hold, he said quietly. The chamber pressures for a 25-pound shell are beyond anything the 18-pounder frame was designed for. Then build it stronger. There's no budget. No busedesastion. If the prototype fails, I'll be dismissed. You'll be court-martialed. Sharp smiled, a grim, tired expression that held no humor. Arthur, I'm 68 years old. I have no wife, no children, and no illusions about how much time I have left. But I watched your brother die. I wrote the letter to his wife, and I have carried that weight every day since. He nodded toward the blueprints. This gun is your chance to put down that weight. It's my chance to. Don't waste it. He left without another word. Arthur stood alone in the fading light, holding a piece of paper that could end his career or change history. But on his desk, beside the rejection letter, sat a photograph in a tarnished frame. William Haskell, 23 years old forever, smiling in his artillery officer's uniform. The photograph had been taken 2 weeks before the Somme. Arthur picked it up. He had spoken to this photograph 1,000 times over 20 years, usually to apologize. Tonight, he made a different kind of promise. I couldn't save you, he whispered, but I can save the ones who come after. Outside, the rain kept falling. In 3 years, German tanks would roll across Poland. In 4 years, Britain would stand alone against the most powerful military machine the world had ever seen. And in the corner of a forgotten arsenal, an old man and a grieving brother would build the gun that helped win the war. But first, they had to prove it worked. The German tanks came out of the morning fog like gray ghosts, their engines growling low and hungry. Sergeant Thomas Bridger had never seen a Panzer before except in training films. Now 3 of them were rolling toward his position across a French wheat field, and he had exactly 17 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition to stop them. That it was May 21st, 1940. The British Expeditionary Force was falling apart. The Wehrmacht had smashed through the Ardennes 5 days earlier, and now Rommel's 7th Panzer Division was racing toward the English Channel. Tommy's battery, 4 25-pounder guns from the 5th Royal Horse Artillery, had been rushed forward to support a desperate counterattack near the town of Arras. Tommy was 24 years old, a working-class lad from Manchester who had joined the artillery because his father said it was safer than the infantry. His father had served in the last war. His father had been wrong about a lot of things. Traverse left. Range 800. Gun Sergeant Malcolm Howe was shouting orders from beside the trail. He was 51 years old, a veteran of the Somme who had re-enlisted when the war began. He moved with the calm efficiency of a man who had seen worse than this. Tommy's crew scrambled to obey. The 25-pounder was new to them. They'd only trained with it for 3 months, but they knew its secrets now. The circular platform beneath the carriage let them spin the gun in any direction. The breech could take armor-piercing rounds as easily as high-explosive. The range was better than anything the Germans expected. The 1st Panzer II fired. The shell screamed past Tommy's position and exploded in the hedgerow behind them. Earth and branches showered down. Load AP. Fire when ready. Tommy slammed the shell home, stepped clear, and pulled the lanyard. The gun roared. 800 meters away, the lead Panzer shuddered and stopped. Black smoke poured from its engine deck. Reload. Traverse right, 2nd tank. The crew moved like a single organism. Shell in, breech closed, lanyard pulled. 9 seconds between shots. The 2nd Panzer took the round through its thin side armor and began to burn. Tommy could see the crew bailing out, their uniforms on fire. The 3rd tank was smarter. It reversed, trying to find cover behind Stonewall. But the 25-pounder's circular platform let Tommy track it smoothly, spinning the gun on its axis while the crew reloaded. One more shot. One more burning hull. 13 rounds fired. 3 tanks destroyed. For one brief moment, Tommy allowed himself to believe they might survive this. Then the German infantry arrived. They came from the east, filtering through orchards the British hadn't secured. Tommy heard the crack of rifles before he saw the gray uniforms. Sergeant Howe turned to assess the threat and jerked backward as a bullet took him through the throat. He fell against the gun's wheel, blood spraying across the breech. Tommy caught him, lowered him to the ground, watched the light leave his eyes. 51 years old, survived the Somme, killed in a wheat field in France by a sniper he never saw. Sergeant Bridger, one of the gun crew, was screaming. "What do we do?" Tommy looked at the bodies, looked at the burning tanks, looked at the ammunition they had left for rounds of armor-piercing, 12 rounds of high explosive. Somewhere above them, Stuka dive bombers were circling, waiting for their turn. That he made the decision in 2 heartbeats. Limber up. We're falling back. The retreat to Dunkirk took 9 days. Tommy's battery lost 3 guns to air attacks, 1 to a bridge collapse, and 17 men to wounds, disease, and simple exhaustion. By the time they reached the beaches, only 1 25-pounder remained, and Tommy received orders to destroy it rather than let it fall into German hands. He couldn't do it. Instead, he dismantled the breech block, the gun's heart, the mechanism that made it fire, and carried it in his pack across 20 miles of chaos. When they asked him why, he couldn't explain. The gun had saved his life. It had killed the tanks that should have killed him. It felt wrong to abandon it completely. On the beaches at Dunkirk, waiting for evacuation, Tommy sat in the sand and cleaned the breech block with an oily rag. An old man in civilian clothes approached him, thin, gray-haired, with eyes that had seen too much. "Is that from one of the new guns?" the man asked. Tommy nodded. 25-pounder. "Best artillery piece I ever crewed. We killed tanks with it." The old man said nothing for a long moment. Then, I'm glad it worked." He walked away before Tommy could ask what he meant. The destroyers were coming. The evacuation was beginning. 704 25-pounders would be left behind in France, but the design survived, and Tommy Bridger carried a piece of it home. The desert night glowed orange with burning vehicles, and Sergeant Major Thomas Bridger had been awake for 36 hours. His 425-pounders had fired over 400 rounds since dawn. The barrels were so hot that the grease sizzled when it touched metal. Two of his gun crews were down to 3 men each. And somewhere beyond the ridge called WWI sat, Rommel's Afrika Korps was massing for another attack. It was July 2nd, 1942. The 8th Army had retreated 500 miles across North Africa, and now they were making their final stand at a railway halt called El Alamein. Behind them lay Alexandria, the Suez Canal, and the oil fields that powered the British Empire. There was nowhere else to go. Tommy was 26 now, 2 years older than the boy who'd fought at Arras, but those years felt like decades. He had learned things in the desert that no training could teach. How to read the shimmer of heat haze for approaching armor. How to estimate range by the sound of enemy guns. How to keep firing when exhaustion turned your arms to lead and your eyes to sand. The 25-pounder had evolved too. New muzzle brakes reduced the brutal recoil. Supercharged ammunition pushed the range past 12,000 meters. But the gun's greatest asset remained what it had always been: reliability. In a war where sand jammed mechanisms and heat warped steel, the 25-pounder kept firing. Fire mission coming in. The radio operator's voice was hoarse. Forward observer reports armor forming up at grid reference 473. Tommy grabbed the handset. The forward observer was Lieutenant Sarah Whitmore, a signals officer who had volunteered for one of the most dangerous jobs in the desert, calling artillery fire from a position within sight of the enemy. She was 29 years old, married to a banker back in London, and she had been guiding Tommy's guns for 3 weeks. Firefly 6, this is Hammer. Ready to receive coordinates. Her voice came through the static, calm and precise despite the gunfire audible in the background. Hammer, Firefly 6. Target is enemy armor concentration. Bearing 045 degrees. Range 2,000 meters from my position. Requesting fire for effect, 12 rounds per gun. Tommy relayed the coordinates to his crews. Within 30 seconds, all 4 guns were loaded and aimed. Firefly 6 shot out. The shells arced into the darkness. 8 seconds later, flashes lit the horizon. Hammer, good effect on target. Adjust left 50 meters, add 100. Fire for effect. The dance continued for 2 hours. Whitmore called adjustments with mechanical precision. Tommy's crews fired until their muscles screamed. Across the desert, German tanks burned and German soldiers died, never seeing the enemy who killed them. T0, 300 hours. The situation changed. Hammer, Firefly 6. Whitmore's voice had lost its calm. Enemy infantry approaching my position. Estimate platoon strength. I am displacing. Static. Gunfire. Then, negative displacement. I am pinned down. Tommy's blood went cold. Without forward observation, his guns were blind. But if he fired on Whitmore's position, Hammer, Firefly 6. They're closing. 50 meters. Her voice steadied. I am requesting fire on my coordinates. Fire for effect. Firefly, repeat that order. Fire for effect on my position, Hammer. Do not waste the ammunition. Tommy looked at his gun crews. They had heard the transmission. They knew what Whitmore was asking. One of the young gunners, a boy from Leeds who had lied about his age to enlist, had tears streaming down his face. She's giving us a target, Tommy said quietly. We don't get to decide what she does with her life. We only get to make sure it means something. He gave the order. 48 high-explosive shells impacted in a space the size of a football pitch. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left but craters and silence. 3 days later, British infantry retook the position. They found Whitmore's body beside a destroyed German half-track. Her radio was still in her hands. In her pocket was a letter to her husband that she had never sent. Tommy took the letter. He read it once, alone in the desert at sunset, Then he folded it carefully and placed it in his breast pocket, next to the oily rag he still used to clean his guns. El Alamein became a victory. Rommel's offensive broke against the British line. The 25-pounders had fired over 80,000 rounds in 12 days, and they had held in London. An old man named Arthur Haskell received a telegram from an anonymous source. It contained 3 words, "It works." He read it once. Then he sat down at his desk and wept. Tommy Bridger carried Whitmore's letter for the rest of the war. He had promised himself he would deliver it personally, if he survived, but first there was more fighting to do. The Panther tank emerged from the tree line like a predator scenting wounded prey, its long 75mm gun already traversing toward the exposed British column. Sergeant Major Thomas Bridger saw it first, saw the way the afternoon light caught the German camouflage, saw the turret beginning its deadly rotation, and knew they had less than 10 seconds to live. That it was November 1944. Tommy's battery was moving forward through the German town of Geilenkirchen. Their 4 25-pounders still limbered behind Moore's quad tractors. They were caught in the open during a position change. There was no time to deploy properly, no time to find cover. The Panther would kill them all. Tommy made a choice that violated every principle of artillery doctrine. Unhitch, engage while moving. His crews had trained for this, not officially, but in the quiet moments between battles, practicing techniques that shouldn't work. The lead gunner released the limber coupling. 2 men swung the trail around while the gun was still rolling. A 4th man loaded an armor-piercing round before the wheels stopped turning. 0.11 seconds from full movement to first shot. The 25-pounder roared. The shell caught the Panther in its thinner side armor, just below the turret ring. The German tank shuddered, stopped, began to burn. 2 more Panthers emerged from the trees. Tommy's crews engaged them with the same impossible speed, guns firing while their trails still scraped across frozen mud. 1 Panther exploded. The other reversed and fled, but not before its parting shot struck Tommy's No. 3 gun. The shell detonated against the shield, killing 2 gunners instantly and throwing the rest across the road. When the silence came, Tommy found himself standing in a field of burning wreckage. 2 of his guns were destroyed. 4 of his men were dead. The survivors stared at him with the hollow eyes of men who had seen too much death. An old man in a civilian coat was walking toward him through the smoke. Tommy recognized him immediately. The thin frame, the gray hair, the eyes that had watched him on the beach at Dunkirk 4.5 years ago. "You were there," Tommy said, "at the evacuation. You asked about the gun." Arthur Haskell nodded slowly. "I designed it. Started in 1919, finished in 1939. 20 years of work." He looked at the burning Panther. 20 years to build something that could do that. Tommy didn't know what to say. He had carried this gun across 3 continents. He had killed with it, lost friends defending it, watched it save lives that nothing else could save. And now its creator was standing in front of him, an old man in a borrowed coat, watching his life's work burn German tanks in a frozen field. "Why are you here?" Tommy finally asked. "They sent me to evaluate whether the gun is still adequate. American artillery throws heavier shells. German rockets create terror we can't match. The War Office wants to know if we need something new. And what will you tell them?" Arthur was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and touched the barrel of Tommy's surviving gun, the one that had fired first, that had killed the Panther, that was scarred and worn from 4 years of war. "I'll tell them that some weapons are more than metal. They become what their crews make them." He looked at Tommy. "You've been carrying that same breech block since Dunkirk, haven't you? I saw you cleaning it on the beach." Tommy nodded. "Couldn't leave it behind. Felt like abandoning a friend. It's the heart of the gun, the mechanism that makes everything else work." Arthur smiled, a tired, gentle expression. "I designed it to last a lifetime. I didn't know whose lifetime it would be." The war ended 6 months later. On May 8th, 1945, Tommy's battery fired its last shells, not at Germans, but into the sky in celebration. The guns fell silent for the first time in 6 years. Arthur Haskell stood with the crews as they gathered around their weapons. The young gunners, boys who had been children when the war began, were laughing and crying and embracing each other. The older men stood apart, not celebrating, just breathing. Tommy found Arthur watching the sunset. "What happens now?" the old designer asked. "I deliver a letter." Tommy touched his breast pocket, where Sarah Whitmore's final words had rested against his heart for 3 years. "Then I figure out how to live in peacetime. And the guns." Tommy looked at the 25-pounders, battered, worn, magnificent. More than 12,000 had been built. They had served in every theater, fired millions of rounds, and helped destroy the most powerful military machine the world had ever seen. "They'll keep them in service," he said, "because they work, because they're reliable, because some things are worth holding on to." The 25-pounder remained Britain's primary field gun until 1967. Arthur Haskell died in 1952, his contribution largely forgotten. Tommy Bridger delivered Sarah Whitmore's letter to her husband that summer, then spent his remaining years telling the stories of the gunners who served in Pakistan. Ammunition for the 25-pounder is still manufactured today. Some guns never truly die. They just become part of the men who crewed them.